Hey guys, subscribe for daily content, and if you're shopping for gear, make sure you check out the description for the newest items at some of the very best online retailers. There's also links for some of the items that I personally recommend. Thanks!
What's going on YouTube? Metal Complex here, and today I've got a really cool knife review / knife overview to share with you guys. This is the new Herman B, a new model from Herman Knives. Very cool. Definitely a little on the smaller side, but not quite as small as their micro sting. Now, obviously what we're looking at here is a full dress Herman knife. So this particular variation of the B, it was an incredibly expensive one. But just like all other Herman knives, they come in a wide variety of different blade materials and, finishes and materials for the titanium scales. So you're going to have a massive variation in price. Even at base, a Herman knife is very, very expensive. What makes them so expensive? It's because they are partially handmade. There's a lot of machine elements, but partially handmade in Poland. This is a small house or a small in-house production company with their own equipment. They are not mass produced, right? They're not having these things manufactured in China. So when you do things like that, it's going to be incredibly expensive. Where you would actually compare Herman knives, as I've said many times before, they're in the same caliber as like Shirogorov. So yeah, they're going to be a lot more expensive than, some of the titanium frame locks that you see for the $200 to $300 price point from companies like Bestech or WE or whoever. But very, very cool. A lot of people really enjoy Herman knives. I personally collect Herman knives, and I'm a huge fan of some of their more kind of their more showy stuff, for sure. At base, though, this actually is a fantastic EDC cutting tool. I really like the profile. There's a lot of things I really enjoy about it. Some things I don't so much. We're going to go over that. But for people who, are willing to spend some money on a super premium knife, but maybe not wanting to go super duper crazy like something like this, right? If you want to carry something like that, the base version of this knife will actually work really well. Thanks so much to Herman Knives and Polish Custom Knives for allowing me to take a look at this. I will link Polish Custom Knives down in the description so that you guys can check this stuff out. If you're looking for a super crazy Herman knife, they carry the whole range, right? All the different models and the base versions all the way up to the super crazy stuff. If that's what you're looking for, the super crazy stuff, you definitely want to check out Polish Custom Knives because that's oftentimes where you're going to find that. But I'll link these down in the description. It does help my channel when you use those links, but that's entirely up to you. Thanks to my patrons for supporting me. Please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex and on TikTok at the_metal_complex. So first off, let's measure this knife. The overall length of the B, we are going to talk about that blade. Don't worry. 7 1/4 inches, 3 1/4 inches of of blade length, and about 3 1/8 in terms of cutting edge. How does it stack up against some other Herman knives? For those of you watching this specifically to compare to some of your other Herman knives, here is the Sting, which is right about kind of the middle of the road for the size of their knives. I don't have a micro sting on me right now. I don't usually end up keeping those. Those end up being, giveaway items or things that I end up selling because I feel the micro sting for me is just a little bit too small. But the micro sting is a little bit smaller. Let's put it up against something like the Ishtar. This one is my personal knife. Actually, all of these size comparisons are going to be my personal knives. Here it is up against the Slim. Slim's a much bigger knife. And then their largest knife would be the Dragonfly. So you can see here it's quite a bit smaller than the Dragonfly. Let's put it up against some knives that you guys are probably a little more familiar with. Any custom scales you find in this section can be found down in the description under Original Goat and Others. So up against the 8010 and the 8020.5. You can see here, it's actually fairly close to the size of the 8020.5 and has quite a bit more cutting edge, just a lot less handle, and it's a lot smaller. It's a lot more compact knife in general. Let's go ahead and put it up against the Spyderco PM2 and the Spyderco Para 3. Once again, closer to the smaller size knife here, which is the Para 3. Way more cutting edge than the Para 3, just a lot shorter handle. I think it's a consistency that you'll see with Herman knives is their blade to handle ratio is always really, really good, right? That's why they, they kind of give you that Shirogorov aesthetic sense, right? You're like, that reminds me, they kind of give off a Shirogorov vibe. It's that ratio, right? They obviously have their own personality and their own aesthetic, but the blade to handle ratio is what is giving people that impression. Finally, up against the Benchmade Griptilian, or in this case, the Ritter Hogue and the Hogue Deca. All right, how's the action on this knife? So every Herman knife, save for my DLC Dragonfly, has had fall shut or nearly fall shut action. Their DLC, this is just taking a little longer to break in, and truthfully, I'm not sure if it ever will completely. I could probably adjust the pivot, but all of their non-DLC, well, that's actually not true. This is a DLC Damasteel, and it is almost fully fall shut. This is more of a chalky, not quite the same Spyderco DLC, but it's definitely, that Detent ball's having a lot harder time on that surface. This guy is a polished Fafner. Boy, that pattern's apparently called Fafner Damasteel. Absolutely ridiculous. We'll talk about that. But my goodness, is this smooth. Now, at some point, they switched to a tungsten carbide bearing washer. And then the bearings themselves, I was reading about this on their website, and they also told me about it. The bearings themselves are incredibly hard. But the way that they've got this set up now is that the action should be noticeably different. And it is. The newer ones that I've handled, they were already good, but the newer ones that I've handled are really spectacular. You don't have to go through that, like all of my Herman knives went through a little bit of a break-in period and then became very smooth. These are just smooth right out of the gate. Very consistent, definitely. There is a warning. They explained this to me. Now these, like especially, I believe like the really nice ones will come with a tool. In fact, actually, I feel like they all might come with a tool now. I might be wrong about that, but this one came with a tool. It came with a box and a tool. At least the super, dressy ones or the half-dress ones, the ones that come in the full wooden box. Either way, it's a Torx, and I can tell you the exact size. I think it's actually quite a gigantic size there, and we'll do the hardware check at the same time. But you can use the tool it comes with, or you can use a T. Is this the right size? This is a T15. Might actually be a T20. It doesn't look big enough to be a T20. We're gonna check it. Oh, it is. Yeah, it's a T20. Okay, but you got to be really careful. These things are so hard, right? Little tiny micro adjustments on something like this where the tolerances are super tight. It does not take much of an adjustment, right? If you've ever tried to adjust the centering and the action on something like the Ontario Rat, it could go anywhere from a quarter turn to a half turn, right? You could even go a full, rotation of that pivot, and the action will vary a little bit, right? Or the tightness, right? You get it to a point where it's too tight. What I'm saying is there's a lot of room for not a lot of difference in terms of the effect that it has on a knife like this. It has to do with, number one, the tolerances. Obviously, this is a much cheaper knife. Number two, it's got Teflon in there. The tolerances on this are ridiculous. Easily within 1/1000th of an inch. Probably quite a bit less, right? I mean, these things are built to essentially to perfection. The bearings are also incredibly hard. So if you're going to adjust the pivot, you can do that, but you have to be really careful because you can crack those bearings. So be careful about that. They warned me about it, and they wanted me to make sure that everybody who watches my channel pays attention to that as well. They have a good warranty, but it is something that you should be aware of. The idea behind these bearings is to improve the action while maintaining solid lockup and good centering, all of that. But it is absolutely possible to over-tighten these and crack those. So just be very, very careful. But anyways, I said I was going to go ahead and do the hardware check. So we're going to do some things out of order here. But the pivot is a T20. By the way, my tools are extremely inexpensive and extremely recommendable. You can find them right down in the section of my description that talks about the tools I use on this channel. I believe they're still using a T6. Man, Herman, I would just love it. Herman Knives. I would love it if you guys would upgrade, and I do say upgrade because I think that a T8 is superior. I would love it if you would upgrade to T8 fasteners. These are all T6. We have two T6 for the pocket clip, and no mounting position for lefties. But Herman makes left-handed knives. If you did not know that, they dedicate to making left-handed knives, which is great. right? So it's always nice to see companies cater to left-handed people one way or another. And this is, in my opinion, the best way to do it is just to make a left-hand dedicated knife. You do not have fasteners on the show side. The screws go all the way through and they just dome them off right here, which I think is great. So even though you're having to deal with T6 screws, the construction is incredibly simple. This is a knife that you can absolutely take apart. Just be careful not to over tighten things. And then you only have 3 body screws because it's just 3 on one side. Why 3? I don't know. They do that on all of their knives. It's always 3. So weird. I think you guys should you should drop back to 2. But okay. It's honestly a really nice way to do this. I mean, I barely noticed those little bumps right there, but honestly, I think they're kind of cool. So I don't really, I'm not really bothered by them. As long as you have the right tools for the job and a place to put your hardware, you should be good to go. It should not be too difficult of a process, but the bearings can definitely come out of there, right? So the disassembly itself is not a complicated process, but you definitely want to be aware of the potential for loose bearings. I always forget to talk about that when I talk about Herman knives, and people point that out, and it's a very good point. If you've never dealt with loose bearings before, it can be a bit of a nightmare. So just, be ready to have a container, right? If you're going to do that. I would not recommend doing that unless you absolutely had to, right? But you can do it, and the process of getting in there is simple. So anyways, let's go ahead and do carry profile. So the thickness of the B up against something like the Para 3, it's definitely a thin knife. These are contoured scales as well, which is absolutely something that needs to be pointed out when we are considering all elements that contribute to the final price tag. A lot of people don't realize how much more expensive it is, to purchase the equipment that is required to contour titanium, right? Creating or milling a piece of titanium that ends up being flat is substantially less expensive. So that is absolutely part of it. But it's also, on the thinner side. So I feel like the contouring is definitely aiding to the comfort here. But up against the PM2 and Para 3, I just EDC'd this guy around my house, given the type of knife that it was. But it's also not a knife that needed necessarily, there's nothing ultra complicated about the construction here. It's pretty straightforward. We see this type of construction a lot. It's just how they executed it, right? The extra attention to detail, right? And the materials, things like that. But as far as what the knife is and how it's constructed, it's not complicated at all. In fact, I've definitely reviewed hundreds of knives with a similar build, right? With the nested liner lock and the titanium scales, right? With the bearings and things like that. So this got some pocket time, not a ton. It operated exactly as I expected that it would. But the carry profile is honestly, it's super compact, and it will essentially disappear in your pocket. Length and height up against the PM2 and Para 3. This guy fits essentially inside of the body of the Para 3. So yeah, it's going to be so compact, and it's lightweight enough that you might forget that it's there, especially if you are used to carrying much larger knives. The B, these are all going to weigh about the same unless, sometimes they use black Damascus, which is going to have zirconium in it, and those will have, they'll be subtly heavier, just a little tiny bit, but most of them are going to weigh about the same. This guy weighs, it's actually at the ultra lightweight. I thought it'd be over. This is under the point where I call it ultra lightweight, 3 ounces or less, right? So to me, anything under 3 ounces, whether it's 2 ounces, 2.8, 1.5, it's all trivial. If it's under 3 ounces, there's a chance that I'm going to forget that it's in my pocket compared to what I usually carry. If you're used to carrying smaller knives, it might not be much of an issue to you. But if you're not used to carrying smaller knives, right, and you're considering picking up something like this, this would not be the type of thing, even if you're looking at the base version of this, this is not the type of thing you want to forget that is in your pocket, for sure, right? That's just, that's part of being a knife enthusiast. Once you climb the ladder, a lot of people say, I'll never carry an expensive knife because there's a risk of losing it. That is a judgment call that has to be made by each individual person. I personally own close to 300 knives, and many of them are hyper expensive. And while I don't carry the most expensive stuff, there are definitely knives that approach or go over $1,000 that do see carry time. And personally, I've never lost a knife because I feel like I'm much more aware when I'm carrying a knife that is substantially more expensive. I am much less likely to forget that this is in my pocket versus something that is of similar size but much less expensive, like the Ontario Rat 2. So if you're thinking that, if you've been intimidated about spending a whole bunch of money on a pocket knife, you're interested, but you're intimidated by the idea of spending that much money and you want to actually carry it and use it, I feel like it's kind of a new, it's like unlocking a new skill in a video game. Once you get to that point, you kind of automatically get this passive skill where you're like, pays attention to knife in pocket, more attentively because the knife is more expensive. You just kind of automatically do that, at least in my experience. But everybody's different, so. Anyways, blade stock thickness, let's go ahead and measure that here real quick. These are usually on the thinner side. I think the thickest by far is the Dragonfly, of course, and that one's not even all that thick. I want to say that one's like 140, but this guy comes in at 118 thousandths, so definitely on the thinner side. Let's go ahead and move into the meat and potatoes. First off, I'm going to try to clean this off just a bit here so that I can showcase. I'm going to get a microfiber cloth that's brand new. So you guys know that I pretty much, I give away a ton of knives, but I always steal the microfiber cloths out of the packages because I like to have fresh ones for stuff like this. The reason I'm doing this is, of course, the ano on this Damascus. This is not just like a plasma ano, right? This is actually titanium Damascus. What I'm doing here is I'm wiping off a lot of my finger oils so that we can see how vibrant this actually is. And let me tell you, no matter how good I get this, the camera is not going to properly showcase this. Herman Knives is so crazy about like bringing out the ano in titanium Damascus. It is amazing how close they get to red. I think they listed this as like purple, gold, blue. This is like magenta. Getting red is technically impossible when we're talking about anodizing titanium. Herman Knives gets really close with a lot of this stuff, and it's also polished. On top of that, you have this little divider line giving it kind of a faux bolster look here, and this has like a hammered finish. Oh my gosh, that is so beautiful. And then down here, you kind of have that burst or that seashell pattern that they always do. They got a bunch of different patterns that they do. I don't think that the B is not like you can only get this pattern. I think they actually have quite a few patterns as they do on their other models. They have a few different patterns that you can do, but I do like this. It's really neat. But either way, they still have those absolutely beautiful patterns, and you can see it really well. Of course, it's brought out by the ano, but the contrast there is absolutely stunning. That makes each one of these unique. A lot of times people will see a Damascus knife and they'll be like, yeah, Damascus, it all looks the same, right? But then you look at Herman knives and you realize how different they can look. They're clearly not anodizing them all the same way because there are dramatic differences between some of these. Some of them end up very dark blue and purpley, which is very typical for Damascus. Some of them end up like, they have wild black Damascus that is green, and it's just like mostly green, and it's really amazing. And so if you have a preference with that stuff, sometimes you can find exactly the right color combinations. It's really cool, and it sort of showcases the extra effort that they go to make their products super duper unique. They're all incredibly premium, and they're all incredibly functional. Obviously, they're not making incredibly hard, they're not making things like cold steel with the Triadlock. These are not knives that are designed as like ultra hard use apocalypse, like go out and baton, what am I thinking? I'm not railroad ties, but the big railroad slabs, like those big pieces, essentially like a gigantic 8x8 or 6x6. It's not the idea there. That's what I'm saying. The idea here is a premium cutting tool that is incredibly functional, but mostly very, very beautiful to look at, and a lot of effort went into it, right? You can go pretty much anywhere and get a nice functional pocket knife for less than $50. In some cases, less than $30. You can get a great pocket knife, right? And if all you're after is a simple cutting tool, then that's what you should do. But Herman Knives makes cutting tools that function just as well. In some cases, a little better. There are definitely knives out there that might function a little better. But the focus is definitely on the effort in terms of execution, in terms of, like the fit and finish, right? And the incredibly beautiful and vibrant materials and, all of these little tiny details that sort of scratch the itch or ring the bells of the knife enthusiasts, the people who want more from their simple cutting tools. Herman Knives does that very, very well for that small percentage of people that's actually looking for that. And this knife is no exception. It's the same type of thing, right? Ergonomically, I don't love how short this is, and I have to be honest here. This knife is a little bit too small for me. And I've always maintained when I can only get 3 fingers on the primary, ergonomic zones of the knife, I don't like that. I want to get a full lock in. Now, admittedly, there is space for my pinky, but it's on one of these ramps, and I always feel like it's sliding off. So it's not necessarily that it's bad. It's just too small for me, right? Because that's what I'm complaining about there is very subjective. There are plenty of people who would say, oh, yeah, 3-finger lock-in is just fine, right? Now, am I comfortable? Is my 3-finger lock-in comfortable? Yes, I'm noticing the pocket clip, and this is something that is the case with all Herman knives. I brought this up before. I think their pocket clips are too long. I would really prefer their pocket clips to be much shorter. Like in the case of the Dragonfly, oh my gosh, right? Way too long. That seems to be Herman's, I think that he just likes that. That's like a preference, right? So my preference is the pocket clip should be shorter because I don't like feeling it up here in my handle. I'm gripping it. This is definitely over the 50% line, and it's a shorter handle, right? So I'm definitely feeling it there. Outside of that, though, as per usual, all the edges are nicely knocked down. There's nothing sharp, save for maybe the very tip of the flipper tab. And I don't mean sharp like unfinished sharp. I just mean it's just like a small pointy object, right? So yeah, the ergonomic lines are good in terms of, the comfort that I'm experiencing at the edges here. It's all fine. I don't like that my finger's popping off the end. I think ideally that, just an elongated bee, maybe they make a hornet or something, a wasp, right? Maybe they're setting themselves up for that. I don't know. But a longer version of this knife would definitely, I think, be a little bit better. I would prefer that. And then the pocket clip, well, I think it's actually one of their shorter clips just because it's a shorter knife. I would still like it to be slightly shorter. You can see it's actually quite a bit like the ratio, like how much of the percentage of the handle that is being covered on the sting, right? It's much more than here. Still would like it to be a little shorter. That's just my opinion, though. Ergonomic lines themselves are pretty good. The Damasteel here, I think I'm saying that correctly. Fafnir. Damasteel does a ton of different patterns. If you don't know what Damasteel is, this is premium stuff. It's not like, oh yeah, wow, pattern weld, whatever, right? I mean, yeah, but it's the proprietary Damasteel. So RWL 34 and PMC 27. What you end up with is a combination of materials that is not only pretty to look at, depending on the pattern, but it's also very performance oriented. I mean, this is going to perform very similarly to CPM 154. And while that's not like, oh my gosh, the most amazing steel ever, it's definitely a good steel. It's a very balanced steel, but getting that level of performance and this, like if you're into this aesthetic, getting this level of beauty on the knife as well, that's pretty cool. This is some absolutely wild stuff. Very, very complex, very busy, right? Both sides of the blade. I think this side is actually the most beautiful. Really, really amazing stuff. I don't know what I want to call this blade shape, so I'll let you guys decide. It is definitely a very aggressive triangle, so that's where we'll leave it there. But as per usual, the cutting bevel on both sides, very even. The factory edge is definitely, ooh, man, that is sharp. It's real bitey. Let me just slice a piece of paper here, which doesn't really prove much, right? But the factory edge is definitely razor sharp. Oh boy, yeah, real bitey. Like, let me try. I'm gonna do my best to explain this. But, and I know I don't need to. I know you guys know what I'm talking about, right? But when you touch the edge, sometimes, depending on how the edge is sharpened, you can feel it almost popping the little dead skin fibers, right? So it actually feels like it's biting, or like it almost has little teeny tiny teeth, right? It's almost like if you've ever been bit by a lizard, one of those little tiny. We have a bunch of little skinks around here, and so I'll catch them for my kids, and they can't really hurt you, but they're little micro teeth that you can feel, like when they pinch, you can feel them pulling, and what would, if you were much smaller, it would do a lot of damage to you, right? It's kind of like that. It's very bitey, but absolutely a super duper sharp blade it won't take much effort. Let's see if I can just barely, right there. It doesn't take much to bite into the material that you're going to cut. Now, it's a deep etch, so if you're wondering, can you feel the indentation of this dam steel? Yes, you can. And that does create drag, right? So these types of knives are definitely more, like they're still functional tools, but in situations like this where you have a super deep etch in the damascene steel, it does pull away from some of the performance because it makes it, in some situations, depending on what you're cutting, if you plan to actually buy a knife like this and use it, it will actually create additional drag a little bit. So the less expensive versions of this knife will perform better, generally speaking, right? And I mean, the less expensive versions of the knife will come in M390 or M398. I think they still use LMAX sometimes. They might use something else. Typically, their M390 tends to be around 61, 62, and their M398 also seems to be right around there. A lot of people say their M398 should be a little bit higher. Yeah, you'll get better performance out of M398 in terms of edge retention if it's heat treated exactly the same way as their M390, but M398 can actually go a little bit harder and still gain the benefit of what it was designed for, right? Their LMAX, I think, also right around the same point. And honestly, I think it's like they hit all their steels right around the same point, which is fine, but there should be variation depending on what the steel is. In any case, your less expensive versions will not only have more, if you consider higher edge retention to be the defining element when we talk about performance, which it isn't. It's just the thing that we all put up on a pedestal, So the less expensive versions of the knife will be fully flat ground with no, deep edge, nothing to create additional drag. If you buy one that's, they have like the tumbled, it's like a real smooth tumbled or orange peel finish, obviously not going to create nearly as much drag, and the edge performance or edge retention is going to be much higher, right? So if that's what you're after, I would definitely recommend the less expensive ones. But for people who want the beauty, they can definitely do this right. That is super crisp. We have some high reflectivity contrasting with that etch there. Absolutely gorgeous. And I think my favorite area of the knife is back here, where you can see the pattern and how it all comes together. That is just so beautiful. And even up on the swedge, man, that is just, I love stuff like this. I think that's so cool. I also love the polished pivot, and then the insert on the pivot on this side. Absolutely stunning. Really, really cool how it's highlighted on the outside with the titanium bits there. We also have, in this case, we have a Timascus backspacer, Timascus pocket clip. There are, half-dress versions of these where you get more of a plain handle or something that's maybe got some simple ano, and then you have, a blade that is Damasteel or Alema Damax or the Balbach Damas. That's kind of some of my favorite stuff. They also use Damacore, so depending on what type of exotic blade material you want, they use those things. You can get a simple one, that's all gray, kind of like how my Sting is. Those are going to be the least expensive. You can do a simple one with a little bit of ano. It'll be right around the same price tag, right? It's just, there's a bunch of little tiny, there's base, and then there's base plus a half step, or base plus a full step, base plus 2 steps. Then there's the half dress, and then there's the semi, or the very nearly full, or the full dress, and then every now and then they have absolutely crazy stuff. There's a lot of different versions is what I'm saying. The carry depth, or we should probably save that bit for the end there, because I realized I didn't quite finish up here. The maximum depth in the pocket is about right here. In and out of the pocket, super easy. Nice retention, but very smooth under here. The texturing's not enough to really mess with your pants too much. We didn't talk about the detent, really. On this knife, I think the detent is much better than the Micro Sting. If you are familiar with the microsting, those of you who have picked these up, it has the weakest detent. Now, Herman in the past has said, hey, if you have an issue with the detent, send it back and we'll try and tune it up for you, which I thought was really cool. Apparently, they will do that if you're not happy with the detent. The detent on the Sting, definitely a little tiny bit heavier than this, right? So these two are very similar. And then from there, yeah, this is maybe just a little heavier still. And definitely the two heaviest detents are probably going to be this guy and then finally the Dragonfly. But as somebody who is, I own multiple of, I've owned multiple of the Slim, and this is my third Dragonfly. And each Dragonfly is a little bit different. Each one of these is clearly being tuned individually. So you might have a slightly lighter detent than what you feel like I'm describing here, or you might have a slightly heavier detent, right? But the model that is a consistently lighter detent from, in my experience, because I've had 3 of them now, is the Micro Sting. Those are all really light, and I feel like those should be kicked up a bit. This is pretty good. I'd still say it's on the lighter side. I wish it felt exactly like my Sting, right? But if they're all being tuned individually and there's a little bit of variation in there, then you're going to have a little bit of preference. Some people probably pick this up and say it's absolutely perfect. But I would say it's definitely better than the Micro Sting. So I'm pretty happy with it. In terms of access to the lock bar, very, very good. I've never had an issue. This is a titanium nested lock bar. Very nice. And we can actually test that here with the magnet. It should not attract to anything. Yeah, all titanium. Well, it actually does have milling internally. And then also it'll say what it says in there, unless we might not be able to read it, proudly made in Poland. So that is, like I said at the beginning, where these are going to be made. Yeah, I was trying to get back to exactly what it is. Oh, yeah, I wanted to point out here that the flipper tab is fine for both your light switch and your push button flips. It's a little bit pointy, so the more comfortable flip is definitely going to be the light switch, right? Doing the push button, so you're going to kind of run into that poke there, but not too bad, right? There is no blade play up, down, left, or right. There is no lock stick at all. There's no double clutch. There's no pivot lash. And then we have a nice click in the closed position. I am disappointed that this one doesn't sing though, but admittedly, the Micro Sting doesn't either. The first one that sings is this guy, a little bit, right? My DLC Herman also sings. The Ishtar. Did I stop it there? It's got a little bit. It's kind of like wanting to. I wonder if me touching the frame is like stopping it. And then this guy definitely does. So I feel like the larger ones sing a bit more. This one doesn't seem to at all. Nope, it's just a click, right? So some people don't care. Some people do. If you wondered, this one doesn't sing. Base price of the B. The absolute base price, from what I can tell, if you got an absolutely plain Jane one in M390 or LMAX, or if they still do LMAX, you're going to look at about $700, in terms of US dollars, right? For something like this, way more expensive. You're talking about 2,700, I think is what they had the list on. But you're not forced to buy those. The base price of Herman knives I have maintained is excellent. I think that is very competitive considering they are in Koenig Arius territory, Oz Machine Company territory, definitely Shirogorov territory, right? When we're talking about quality of execution. They're basically Shirogorov's knives that you're going to pay less money for, right? So very comparable in that department. I've always said that the base price of these knives is very fair. Now, as you start adding options, right, it depends on how badly you want that stuff because it quickly goes up. So I would not expect them to be in line, with what you like if you're looking at like a Chinese knife and you're like, okay, I can get the base version for this much, and if I get it in Damasteel, it's this much. Should you expect the same bump, like the same exact bump in price? No. You're going to pay substantially. It's like they get exponentially more expensive. So if you're going to pick up a Herman knife, the ones that are in the right value zone, definitely are the base versions. Personally, I do like the really high-end stuff. So I personally like to buy that, but it just depends on what it is that you're after. They make some really, really impressive stuff, but if you really want that, you're going to have to pay for it. This is probably overall, all of the knives that Herman makes, they're all good, right? So I don't think Herman makes a bad knife. But if I'm being honest, this new B is probably one of my least favorite. I definitely like it more than the Micro Sting, but I like all of their other models better. I think the Vespertilio is, I much prefer the Vespertilio to this, but I would also like to see them make this exact knife the length of the Slim, because I think that would be super cool. You can see here the handle length is much larger, but I don't have to put my pinky at the back here. I can fit it all into this territory. So I would love to see this blade profile and this handle profile, but elongated. I think that would be really cool for people who want a longer knife, right? It's not that all longer knives are better and all shorter knives are bad. It's just for me personally, I'd like to see it elongated. But if you don't mind the size, this is a great knife. It'll definitely make a good EDC knife. It's just going to be really, really expensive. So obviously, I'm not going to recommend this knife to everybody because it is extremely expensive. Even at base, $700 for a pocket knife, that's a lot of money. For those of you who regularly shop in that territory, do I think that is a good amount of money to spend for this when you're comparing against other knives of, in the same caliber? Yes. To people who are just looking for function and want to get the best bang for your buck in terms of materials and all, if you think titanium M390 200, right, then stay in that territory, right? This is definitely a higher quality item, but as far as every dollar spent past what you're used to, most people will be able to pick something like this up and say, this is clearly a nicer knife. But is it 600 nicer versus what I'm used to? Probably not for you, right? Probably not. I think that a lot of those people should probably stay kind of right where they're at and enjoy what they're already enjoying. But Herman knives are definitely spectacular. For those people chasing this territory, this is definitely very, very good. So that's really all I have to say, guys. This was a super, super long video, as the Herman reviews tend to be. Continuing to enjoy this stuff. So yeah, thank you so much to Herman and Polish Custom Knives for letting me share this with everybody. That's going to be it today. Please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like, so check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, go ahead and click on that Metal Complex logo right there and subscribe, because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and have a great day.